We have another academic expert again on the issue of stadium financing who is Skyping in right now, so I appreciate it. Craig Depken with the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, who had written Fan Loyalty and Stadium Funding, among other academic research. So, Craig, I appreciate your Skyping in today.
No worries, thank you.
So we'd had the opportunity to chat a little bit earlier. We just actually talked with Jeff Dorfman out of the University of Georgia, but looking to get different perspectives from academics who have studied the issue very closely of public funding for stadiums as we await here to hear what the ask is going to be from the Pawtucket Red Sox as they look to build a new stadium in Pawtucket. So I kind of want to start very open-ended as we don't know what that looks like right now. What should folks be keeping an eye on in terms of the research that you've done and things that they really should be asking as this proposal is impending very, very shortly?
Right, I think the biggest thing from the point of view of the economists has been the amount of public contribution that goes to the stadium. So stadium costs is around to $100 million. Mm-hmm. And in the past, and I'm talking about the distant past in the 60s and 70s, the city would come in and cover that entire expenditure. But now that the stadiums are becoming much more expensive, it's becoming harder for the cities to justify that expenditure. So I think the biggest question about any proposal is, obviously total cost is important, but it's how much of the public is the public's being asked to foot that bill.
And, as we talk about it here, we've talked with folks, everyone has been in today. Again, we've asked, the collective ownership group of the Pawtucket Red Sox worth billions of dollars. A lot of folks here in Rhode Island ask, why should we be giving you any money to be putting forth the stadium when you guys are, again, worth billions?
So there's a good argument that can be made that from the point of view of the team owners, they'll make this argument that baseball or any type of sporting event is a different animal than, say, a widget factory or a gas station, something like that, because of this public benefit that derives from the team itself. Economists are a bit skeptical about that because while it sounds good theoretically, trying to put a dollar figure on that is very difficult. And if we could, most likely it would be much smaller than the proponents are making an argument of. So coming back to your original question, why would we give multi-billionaires money for building a stadium? That's kind of where the field of economics has been for quite some time, and I think actually the public is starting to come around to our arguments a little more. Maybe not so much at the minor league level because the numbers are much smaller, but clearly at the major league level, where cities are being asked for hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, that is becoming basically a non-starter now.
We just had a columnist here who writes for us regularly, who's been around for a long time, and his quip was, "This appears to be socializing the risk and privatizing the reward." Is that an accurate assessment of the situation?
I think for the past few decades, economists have been able to document very easily the benefits that derive to team owners after a new stadium. And it's no different at the minor league level. In the International League, I was just looking at the numbers this morning. As teams have received new stadiums in the International League, the average annual attendance bump is about 60,000 people for the first 6 years. Right now, Pawtucket has an average price of somewhere around $10, maybe give or take a little bit. So that's about $600,000 in additional revenue for the average team in the International League for getting a new stadium. That's relatively easy for us to document. What's harder is what's going on around the stadium, hoteliers, restaurateurs, what kind of development is going to happen after the stadium is built. What would happen if the stadium is not built? I mean, we'd never really get to see that counterfactual. So what's been going on outside the stadiums and for the cities themselves has been harder to document. And I think because it's that difficult, we just don't find a lot of measurable impact. Doesn't mean that there's not a restaurateur that can't buy a new car because of what's going on during and before and after baseball games, but it's just that one individual firm doesn't have enough oomph to make a difference at the city level for us to measure.
And have you done or seen any research, where they're currently at in McCoy? The costs are very low for ticket price, food price, parking price. You talk about the attendance bumps. Do we see sort of costs rise a little bit within the parks themselves by lieu of it being a new park? But does that not then have an impact? Does that have minimal impact on an increase in attendance then?
So I'm not seeing anything about that at the minor league level. At the major league level, we see prices increase generally with the new stadium. And that might have an impact on what's going on around the stadium or in the city, because people are spending more in the stadium. I think the minor league model, though, is a little more resistant to that because it is centered on the repeat customer, affordability, that you can bring the entire family and not break the bank. And so I think the fears of that are a little bit less in terms of the minor league system. But with new attendance, you might expect to see some small price increases just because it's more crowded, right? So we need to meter that.
So what we're hearing, again, we've gotten some indications from the Pawtucket Red Sox what they're looking at. But again, we're looking at that they're going to be making an ask from the state to build a stadium at a new location. And again, a price tag of around $75 million. And as I think we'd spoken about before, the effort last time in 2015 to move the team to Providence for an entirely new stadium that would have been private but gotten taxpayer assistance had fallen flat. What do you see in terms of places around the country? You know, there is some very staunch opposition to any assistance here. How has that played into the potential for stadiums and making them succeed, getting off the ground in general, or not? I mean, what's the role that the public generally plays in these conversations?
So again, historically, the city council or maybe the city elders would get together and decide to build a stadium. And it probably wasn't terribly controversial because the stadium would be multi-use, and so we could use it for all sorts of different events. Recently, in the past 25 years, in the major league arenas, baseball, football, these are becoming much more expensive and they're single purpose. And so that's where a little more controversy creeps in because we can't say, well, we can always have a concert or motocross there. It's just would be used for one sport. I think at the minor league level, those concerns are a little less, or at least have been expressed less often because the numbers are relatively small, but also because historically minor league baseball has actually had a lot more of a fluidity. That is, teams move, they change affiliations, and so we know that we don't know this. I'm sorry, but the research shows that when a major league team owns their stadium, they're less likely to leave. That kind of makes sense. I've never seen any true evidence about that at the minor league level.
Okay.
But we do see a lot of movement with minor league teams, and so one concern would be that if a team doesn't own their stadium, they're more likely to leave. They could be enticed by somebody else, and then the city's kind of stuck with the stadium with no use, or they have to find some other tenant for the stadium. So I think at this point, the public input is much more important because the potential trade-offs are becoming more important. That is, cities are continually strapped for money for other uses, and so that's one concern. And then there's also this issue about, how can we be sure that the team's going to stick around? And while teams can sign contracts, that may or may not be.
We've seen them broken time and time again. Now, did you raise this as a hypothetical? Have we seen examples of this, or is this just something that's in the sort of the back of everyone's mind as something that could happen?
About teams moving?
About teams moving.
Oh, sure. If we look at the major league level, most teams that have been relocating are in publicly owned stadiums. And those that are not relocating, in one particular, the parent team of the Red Sox that are in Pawtucket, they're not moving. Now, again, unlikely that you'd ever see the Boston Red Sox have to move. But if we look at what happened in San Diego just recently with the Chargers, that's a publicly owned stadium, and they didn't get a new stadium, and they left. And so the question is, if the team owns a stadium, then they're more likely to keep it maintained, more likely to try to extend the length of it, right, in order to amortize the value for a longer period of time.
Now, it was funny as you were mentioning this, you do have your research there, again, that fan loyalty and stadium funding. I think the Pawtucket Red Sox are doing a lot in the community, again, since 2015, when they had looked to move to Providence, and there was, again, a lot of backlash for how that deal looked and was constructed, but a lot from Pawtucket residents saying, well, you're going to up and take our team, 10 miles down the road, but this is Rhode Island, and that's a big stretch
Right.
being there. What do we see in these instances about loyalty to teams? When this happens, when, in this instance, again, they're looking to stay, but again, we're talking about a very wealthy group of individuals who own the team. I mean, you've looked into that social construct. How does that play into things?
So so the paper you're referring to looked at how first we had to measure fan loyalty, and we won't go into the weeds on that, but given that I had to measure fan loyalty, then I related that to referenda for new stadiums for over about a 20-year period. And what that evidence showed is that when the team had stronger fans, more loyal fans, they're more likely to have public support that is 50% plus one support for stadium construction. That was conditional on the amount of money being asked and things like that, the size of the city and population and whatnot. I've also done something similar like that in looking at National Football League teams, and there the question was, were teams more likely to relocate when their fans were weaker? Were they more likely to relocate? And that seemed to be the case as well. I've never done any of that at the minor league level, again, because the model typically is that the fan loyalty, if you will, is more to the event and more to the and trying to take the family to this particular type of leisure activity than it is to particular players, because the players are constantly turning over. So I don't have much of an evidence on what fan loyalty would be in the minor league system, but I suspect that the public's response to the ask for X millions of dollars would have a similar pattern that we saw in major leagues.
And I guess kind of one final question, and I've spoken with folks about, we're here in April 2017. There's clearly going to be an ask at the General Assembly. Now our session kind of wraps up in June here. Lots of folks are asking, we're talking potentially 50 million, 75 million, 100 million from the state, not going before voters. What do you see around the country in terms of new stadiums? How much is done simply by bonding or appropriation, and how much actually go before voters in a referendum?
Well, there's a long history of teams coming to the voters for a referendum, and if the referendum passes, then full speed ahead, and if the referendum fails, we'll find another way. So now there have been, of course, it's becoming more common for the referendum to be binding. What happened in California these past few years, where teams have been asking for new stadiums, and the people say no, and then that's the end of it. But in Chicago, here in Charlotte, there have been examples where a vote said no, and then the city council found a way to make it happen. I think that's becoming less acceptable from the point of view of the voters. That here in Charlotte, when the Charlotte City Council decided to build an arena over the objections of the voters, they just voted the mayor out.
There were political ramifications.
I think there's an increasingly more political for that, because the price is getting higher, but also the opportunity costs are getting higher, because local governments are stretched for their resources, and there's more demands for those resources than there were maybe 30, 40 years ago. And that's making it harder for the city council or even the state legislature to just vote for stadiums. I mean, again, what happened in Pennsylvania, 15 years ago, where one faulty handrail led to 4 new stadiums. I think those days are gone as well. So they have to have a better plan for how this quote unquote public-private partnership would work, with an extension on private and less on the public. Here in Charlotte, when our new stadium was built back in 2014, I think the county and the city covered about 20% of the payments. And I think if you talk to most sports economists, that's a number that's within range of what we'd expect to be feasible. And once you get beyond that, these particular numbers, the city's not going to make their money back, and there might be better uses for those resources.
So you talk about that 20% number. Again, if what we're hearing is holding true here in Rhode Island, and again, they're talking about the state building a $75 million stadium, I'm sure the ownership will say, well, here's our investment in the process. What should we be listening to what the ownership group has to say okay, this is a good or not a good deal? I mean, how much skin did they then have to put in the game to sort of prove to Rhode Islanders that it is in fact skin, with, again, if the ask is for the state to actually build the stadium?
This is a good question, and I don't know if we have much of a feel for that. As I say, I think recently stadium plans have led to less than 50% public contribution, maybe even closer to 30%, even at the major league level. So that's my feeling, is that that's the way that the market, if you will, is kind of driving these plans, and that's probably what's acceptable to the public and acceptable to the owners. So this shared burden is no longer 100% just public money, and not 0% public money as we have seen in other cases, but again, kind of a mix. And I wouldn't, again, know much about what's going on in Pawtucket per se, but these are kind of average numbers over the United States. And again, I think people kind of respond to these plans in a similar fashion. If you ask for too much, then we're just going to say no. Right? And so I think that's where the political pressure comes in. I mean, it's a market for ideas, a market for resources, and there are ways of getting around those limitations. We can always just go to the state legislature or to some other entity and bypass the voters. But like I say, I think that's becoming less acceptable nowadays.
And you mentioned a couple other examples of stadiums that were, privately built. So you talked Jerry Jones and the Cowboys. There have been other examples as well. Again, a number of ownership groups go to the states and go to the cities and say, this is what we need. If there are examples, then, again, very wealthy individuals who have proven that they can fund it themselves and make it work, is that not a testament to show that, would it not make you question then why you need the public investment?
I think economists have made that argument for quite some time that, like any private entity, if you need a capital infusion, you can go to a bond market, you can go to a stock market. Now, I understand a lot of times as a firm owner, you don't want to give up that equity, or you don't want to take on liability for the debt. But other firms do this all the time, and so what's so different about sports? Just to correct you a little bit, that Jerry Jones did pay for a lot of his stadium, but a third of it was publicly funded.
Okay.
Again, and that was the beginning of where we kind of saw this 1/3, 25% number starting to kind of materialize.
And is that really, as you said, so that's the industry standard, that 1/3, 25% number?
I think it's just more of a pattern than it would be a standard, but it's kind of seems to be that's where the sweet spot is at the moment.
Okay.
The Jets and Giants built their own stadium.
Yep.
We see with the LA Rams, they're going to build their own stadium as well. So in certain places, there's just no public money available. This is maybe like Las Vegas, there might be more public money available. So it's hard to make a standard claim, but just kind of that pattern is where maybe this private-public partnership is kind of a 2/3, 1/3, with the 2/3 being the private. Like I say, I think most people can understand that a sports team provides benefits for a lot of people, and maybe even benefits for people that don't go to a game or go to many games. But it's hard to kind of justify, like, let's just give this all to, like I say, this multi-billionaire or ownership group that seems to have so much wealth already that, as you're saying, like, we do see cases where stadiums are built privately. So that might be more of a market-specific situation as well. Pawtucket, again, it's not the size of Dallas, and so there might be issues there where, can they actually make enough money off a new stadium, right, to justify being there? And
yes.
If there's concerns about the team relocating, then that's another issue as well that your public debate should entail, right? Personally, I don't like the threats of relocating. That sounds a little more like extortion, maybe.
A hostage taking, if you will.
Yeah, but a discussion about, well, here's what we have, and here's where we might have to go if we don't get a new stadium. And again, the current stadium, is what I can research just briefly, does appear to be ready for a replacement.
Yes.
The question is, how do you go about that?
Well, they had put forth, again, as you in your research, I'm sure, looked, the feasibility study showed what it would cost to rehab it, to tear it down and rebuild. And then it's almost like, they've just taken the whole study off the table and said, we got to go someplace else. And right now, as we've talked with the mayor, there's still a lot of questions surrounding what the new sites would look like from, environmental, whether there's contamination or, CRMC issues. It's right by the water, and it sounded almost like, well, maybe we'll have to address those issues after the fact because they're trying to do it very quickly. Do you find that often when ownership groups decide that they've made up their minds, this is the plan that they want to approach, and then move on a very quick time frame just because that's how business works? I just ask, as we're here in April again during a General Assembly session, that the time frame is very, very short now for them to make the case in front of the General Assembly.
Yeah, I think that's not uncommon. If you look historically at referenda or proposals, they do appear to be rather quickly introduced and discussed. My guess, and I don't have any real evidence of this because I'm not a political scientist, but my guess is that there have been many more discussions in the background between city-state officials and team ownership than is revealed to the public.
Of course.
And that's just my gut. I don't have evidence of that. And I wouldn't mind, it kind of sounds a little sleazy, but I'm not surprised that anything goes on that way. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more discussion that we don't see as the public, so I don't think it's quite unique to stadiums, but it is historically, right, we'd be concerned that those type of, we call rent seeking in economics, but that we're using our position as a team owner or as a league to extract resources from the public in a way that's not at least completely above board.
Well, the mayor said he was, he said he was planning to make sure that there was full transparency, again, in what they put forth. So that's what we're waiting for here. We're waiting to find out how this is going to look, how the funding is going to look for it. And as I said, I wanted to reach out to some national experts just to get a sense outside of Rhode Island. And I really appreciate, Craig, your time today, kind of picking your brain on a few things. Any last sort of parting thoughts to folks here in Rhode Island?
I would say this, though, that just quickly, that the public should demand that transparency. And there'll be, I'm sure, one or two groups that are quote-unquote anti-stadium or anti-stadium.
They are here. They are 100% here.
Yeah, exactly. So, those people are sometimes just, I'm never going to admit to anything.
Yep.
But other times it can have a healthy impact to the debate. And that's what I would recommend, that people don't go completely to $0. I mean, sometimes the public-private partnerships do work out. We just want to make sure that that balance is appropriate. And so that would be more of a local issue, but I think people should ask for that transparency. If they don't get it, then I'd be very suspect of what's going on.
Okay. Well, Craig Depken, I appreciate your Skyping in today.
No worries. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. That was Craig Depken at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte.